You've arrived. The past welcomes you once again. History is not only what was carved into stone or preserved in old manuscripts. It also lives in the whispers of stories passed down through generations, myths, legends and tales that try to explain the mysteries of the world. Tonight, we open a window onto one of those stories. It is said that somewhere beneath the waves, where sunlight fades and sound disappears, lies a city unlike any other. A place of dazzling beauty and immense wealth, its streets paved with marble, its walls gleaming like gold and bronze. But in a single night it vanished, swallowed whole by the sea, leaving behind nothing but echoes and questions. Was it real? A lost civilization erased in an instant? Or was it only a legend born from fear and imagination? For over 2,000 years, people have searched the depths, chasing the secret of this mysterious city, Atlantis. Our journey begins not with explorers or sailors, but with a philosopher. Nearly 2,400 years ago, a man named Plato sat down to write a story unlike any other. In his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, he described a mighty island empire, larger than Libya and Asia Minor combined, rich in resources, advanced in architecture and proud of its power. But pride soon turned to greed, and greed brought its downfall. In a single night, the earth shook, the waves rose, and Atlantis was gone. Tonight, we will step beyond the lines of Plato's writings into the legend that refused to die. We'll explore how this tale has lived on for centuries, half warning, half wonder. So settle in, let the noise of the modern world fade away, and join me as we descend into the mystery of the city that was said to be born from a dream and lost to the sea forever. The sea is quiet tonight. Its surface ripples softly beneath a silver moon, as if it were a mirror of the sky. The waves come and go with a rhythm older than memory, and yet, if you stand on the shore long enough, you might hear something else. A faint whisper drifting across the tide. A story older than stone, older than empires. A story of a city that once was and then was gone. Close your eyes and listen. This is where our journey begins. Not in the present, not even in the age of great explorers who crossed oceans with maps and compasses, but far deeper in time. More than 2,000 years ago, in the quiet chambers of Athens, a philosopher named Plato sat down to write. He did not write poetry. He did not write myths for children. He wrote dialogues, conversations meant to teach, to provoke, to carry lessons across the ages, and in two of these dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, he left behind something extraordinary. A story that he claimed was not entirely his own. It was something passed down, he said, through priests of Egypt, carried into Greek memory, and finally written down by his hand. The story of a land across the sea, a land so vast it was said to be larger than Libya and Asia Minor combined, a land of rivers and fertile plains, shining temples, and wealth beyond imagining. Plato called it Atlantis. But before we step into this vanished city, let us walk slowly through the world in which Plato lived. For only by seeing his time clearly can we begin to understand the weight of the story he told. The year is somewhere around 360 BCE. The city of Athens, though proud, is scarred. A generation earlier it had faced the might of the Persian Empire and miraculously endured. Later, it had reached for power itself, leading a league of Greek cities, only to stumble into the long, bitter Peloponnesian War against Sparta. That war ended with ruin. The city that once dreamed of being the school of Greece found itself weakened, humbled, and searching for meaning. Plato himself was born into this world of uncertainty. He had seen his teacher Socrates put to death by the city he loved. He had witnessed ambition rise and fall, and so in his writings he often spoke not only of politics or philosophy, but of deeper truths, truths that lived in allegory and example. When he spoke of Atlantis then, it may not have been simply a tale of a lost land. It may have been a mirror, a warning, a reflection of how great powers can rise and how quickly they can fall. But still his words carried something more. They painted a vision so vivid, so haunting, that it has lingered far beyond the lessons he intended. For in his description, Atlantis was not only powerful, it was beautiful. Imagine it with me, slowly, as if we're walking through its streets together. The city lay upon a great island, far beyond the Pillars of Heracles, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. Beyond the familiar waters of the Mediterranean, out into the wide Atlantic. Its centre was not one city alone, but a grand capital ringed by the sea itself. Plato described it in careful detail. 3 circular harbours, carved like ripples around the heart of the city, connected by bridges and canals. From above it would have looked like a spiral, each ring shimmering with water and stone. The outermost circle held ships and warehouses, the lifeblood of trade. The next circle, closer still, bustled with markets, homes, and workshops. And at the very centre, gleaming in the sun, stood the sacred heart of Atlantis. Temples rose high, their walls plated in gold and silver, their roof shining like polished bronze. Statues of gods and heroes watched over the city, carved on a scale meant to inspire awe. Among them was a figure of Poseidon, lord of the sea, said to be so vast that he towered over horse-drawn chariots at his feet. And everywhere, water flowed. Channels carried it from rivers and springs into the city, feeding fountains, gardens, and pools. Bridges arched across the canals, their stones smooth beneath countless footsteps. The streets were broad, paved with fine stone, and in the markets one could hear the hum of languages from far and wide. For Atlantis, as Plato told it, was not a quiet island, it was an empire. Its ships sailed far, carrying goods, soldiers, and ambition. Its kings ruled over lands that stretched beyond the sea, and in their pride they looked outward, always outward, seeking to conquer. But here, as in all great tales, lies the turn, for power has a way of growing restless. Wealth breeds hunger for more, and ambition, left unchecked, often becomes arrogance. So it was with Atlantis. The people, once noble in their simplicity, began to change. Their leaders, once wise, grew greedy. The gods, so the story says, looked down and saw not a people in harmony, but a nation swollen with pride. And pride, in Greek thought, was always dangerous. Pride tempted men to rise higher than their place, to challenge even the order of heaven. Thus, Atlantis turned its gaze to the east. Its armies marched, its ships filled with warriors, seeking to bring even Athens itself under its power. And yet, here the story bends toward the unexpected. For Athens, smaller, weaker, far less wealthy, stood its ground. The city that had once nearly fallen to Persia rose again in defence, and according to Plato it defeated the vast might of Atlantis. It was a moral tale, told with purpose. The proud empire humbled by the courage of a free people, a lesson that would echo for generations. For what makes the story endure is not the victory of Athens, it is what happened next. For Plato writes that in a single night, yes, only one, Atlantis was undone. The earth shook with fury, the sea rose with violence, and the island, its temples, its ships, its shining streets of marble and gold, all of it sank, swallowed by the waves, as though it had never been. And from that night onward, the city was gone. Yet was it truly gone, or had it ever been at all? For over 2,000 years, this question has haunted dreamers and seekers alike. Was Plato recording history as he claimed? Was he passing on an ancient memory, preserved in Egyptian lore? Or was it, as some believe, an allegory, a fable crafted to teach about hubris and the fragility of power? We cannot yet answer, but the beauty of the story is that it endures. The sea may not give up its secrets easily, but human imagination refuses to let go. Even now, people peer into the depths, map the ocean floor, and wonder if perhaps beneath the rolling waves there lies a marble street, a shattered temple, a lost world waiting to be found. And so, we drift with the story, half history, half myth, into the darkness of the deep. Atlantis, the city born from a dream, destroyed in a single night, but alive still in the whispers of the tide. The night is long, and the sea remains restless. But let us step away, just for a while, from the rolling waves and sinking cities, and return to the quiet world of Athens. For though Atlantis is remembered as a lost empire, its first true life began not in the ocean, but in words. The careful words of a philosopher who chose to preserve it, as if he himself sensed that the tale would outlive him. Plato sat in the cool air of his academy, the school he had founded outside the walls of Athens. It was here that he gathered his students, teaching them not through long speeches, but through dialogues. Imagined conversations where ideas unfolded naturally. And in two of these dialogues, written in the middle of his life, he slipped in a story unlike any other. The first was Timaeus, a work of cosmology and creation where he explored the very structure of the universe. The second was Critias, which he left unfinished, as if the story of Atlantis itself had broken off mid-sentence, sinking even from his own pen. In these texts, he described Atlantis not as a dream, but as something told long ago, carried across generations. He wrote that the story came from Egypt, from priests who spoke to a great traveller, Solon, one of the wise men of Greece. Solon, it was said, visited the Nile more than a century before Plato, and there, among temples of ancient stone, he listened to the tales of the priests. They told him of a war that had once shaken the world, a war between a mighty empire beyond the sea, Atlantis, and the small but fierce city of Athens. They told him how Athens had stood strong, resisting conquest, and how Atlantis had fallen, swallowed by the sea in a single night. Solon, so the story went, had brought this tale back to Greece, but he never finished writing it. Time passed, and it was Plato who finally took it up, shaping it into words that would endure. But why? Why preserve such a tale? Here, we must remember Plato's purpose. He was not a historian in the way we think today. He was a seeker of truth, yes, but truth in the sense of lessons, examples, and ideals. When he spoke of a city rising to greatness, and then collapsing under its own pride, he may have been pointing a finger at his own world. Athens had risen. Athens had dreamed of empire. Athens had fallen into arrogance, and in the Peloponnesian War, Athens had been crushed. Was Atlantis then merely a shadow of Athens itself, a parable meant to teach humility? Many have thought so, and yet there is something about the detail of the tale something in its geography and its vivid imagery that tempts us to think otherwise. Plato described the island with care, its rings of water and stone, its fertile fields, its temples gleaming with precious metals. He spoke of elephants roaming its land, of canals stretching for miles, of architecture both grand and precise. It does not sound like a parable, it sounds like a memory. Perhaps then it was both, a story that taught a lesson, but also preserved a fragment of something far older, a whisper carried from Egypt, from times before the Greeks, from civilizations that had already risen and fallen long before Athens knew its glory. And here is where the tension grows. For Plato, though respected, was not beyond challenge. Many of his own students, and many who came after, debated whether his story was fact or fable. Aristotle, his most famous student, is said to have dismissed it with a wave of the hand, calling it a useful story, but nothing more. A myth, not a memory, and yet the myth did not die. It spread quietly, like a seed carried on the wind. The Greeks spoke of it. The Romans, inheriting the libraries of Greece, copied it. The medieval scholars, reading what scraps survived the fall of empires, repeated it in hushed tones. And always, through the centuries, the story of Atlantis lived on, never quite fading, never quite being proven. By the time Europe entered its age of exploration, when ships set sail across oceans once feared and unknown, the tale had taken root in eager minds. The Atlantic, once a barrier of mystery, became a canvas for imagination. If there were new lands beyond the horizon, might one of them be Atlantis? Might the story of Plato's dialogues be the memory of a continent lost, waiting to be rediscovered? And so, the legend began to grow. No longer only Plato's warning of pride and fall, but a beacon of mystery, a dream of discovery. But let us move slowly, step by step, through this long memory. Imagine a scribe in Alexandria, carefully copying Plato's words by lamplight, the faint smell of ink and papyrus filling the air. Outside, the city hums with trade, ships docking in the great harbour, scholars debating beneath the shadow of the lighthouse. In his hand, the scribe holds a tale not of Egypt, not of Greece, but of a place beyond both, a place he himself will never see. Yet his careful letters carry it forward, into the hands of another and another across centuries. Imagine, centuries later, a monk in a dimly lit monastery in Europe. The winds outside howl against stone walls, but within there is silence except for the scratching of a quill. He bends over a manuscript, copying Plato's dialogues in Latin. Perhaps he does not even understand the weight of the story he writes, but the words pass once again from one age to the next. And imagine, much later still, an explorer standing on the deck of a wooden ship, staring west into the unknown. The sea stretches endlessly before him, and in the back of his mind, perhaps, lies the whisper of an old tale. Could there be land there, beyond the horizon? Could Atlantis lie waiting, its ruins resting beneath the waves or hidden on distant shores? These are the echoes of a story that refused to die, and yet the most haunting question remains: did Atlantis exist? Was Plato preserving a true memory of a lost civilization drowned beneath the sea? Or was he crafting a myth, a story meant to warn against the dangers of arrogance, dressed in the trappings of reality? The centuries have offered no answer. Scholars argue, historians search, explorers dream. But the sea remains silent. And so the legend grows. The whisper of Atlantis moves from pen to parchment, from parchment to voice, from voice to imagination. And in each retelling it becomes both less and more than what Plato intended. Less because the lesson is often forgotten. More because the dream of a lost world, perfect and powerful, is too beautiful to release. Atlantis becomes not only a story of the past, but a mirror of every age. Each generation looks into it and sees its own fears, its own desires, a warning against pride, a hope for hidden wonder, a reminder that nothing built by human hands lasts forever. And still, beneath it all lies the same vision, marble streets shining in the sun, canals filled with ships, temples plated in gold, a city alive with power and beauty, vanishing in a single night into the depths of the sea. The night deepens, the tide moves in and out, and still the question lingers, was it myth or memory? But to understand why this story has held us for more than 2 millennia, we must follow it further, past Plato, past the scribes and the scholars, into the age when the world itself began to open, when sailors crossed the Atlantic, and when the dream of Atlantis took on new life upon the waves. The sea has always been more than water. It has been a mirror for our hopes, a stage for our fears, and a canvas for our imagination. In Plato's time, the Atlantic Ocean was a mystery, a vast, uncharted expanse beyond the narrow gateway of the Mediterranean. The Greeks called that gateway the Pillars of Heracles, what we know as the Strait of Gibraltar. Beyond it, few dared to venture. The ocean was thought endless, dangerous, a place where monsters might dwell and ships might vanish. But centuries passed, empires rose and fell. Rome claimed the Mediterranean, only to crumble into fragments. Kingdoms shifted, religion spread, knowledge was lost and slowly, painfully, reborn. And as Europe stumbled out of the Middle Ages into what we call the Renaissance, curiosity awoke once more. The sea, which had always waited, now beckoned again. Maps were drawn, compasses refined, sails stretched taut in the wind. And as sailors looked westward across the Atlantic, they carried with them not only instruments and provisions, but stories. Among them, whispered like a secret, was the old tale of Atlantis. The year is 1492. On a small wooden ship called the Santa Maria, a Genoese sailor named Christopher Columbus gazes west into a dark horizon. He believes he will find a shorter route to Asia, lands of spice and silk, wealth and empire. But in the minds of many who sail with him, another thought lingers. If Plato's words were true, if beyond the Pillars of Heracles lay a vast island empire, once mighty, now lost, could they be sailing into its waters? As the New World slowly revealed itself to European eyes, many wondered if the Americas themselves were Atlantis reborn. The great civilizations of the Aztec and the Maya, with their temples, their astronomy, their strange and wondrous cities, seemed to echo Plato's descriptions of a powerful advanced world. To some, it was not coincidence, it was confirmation. Writers in Spain and beyond began to whisper, perhaps Plato had not invented Atlantis. Perhaps he had recorded dimly and imperfectly a memory of these distant lands. Perhaps the Egyptians, so ancient themselves, had heard tales from travellers who crossed the ocean long before Columbus, and Plato had preserved what little survived. The idea spread like fire. Atlantis, once a quiet parable in Greek philosophy, now became something larger. A symbol, a mystery that seemed almost within reach. If a new world could be found across the ocean, then why not a lost one? The 16th and 17th centuries were a time of wonder and terror. Europe was discovering lands it had never imagined, encountering peoples it did not understand. To some, this was proof of human diversity. To others, it was evidence of stories half forgotten. Atlantis seemed to fit neatly into this age of exploration. Books were written, theories spun, each one attempting to anchor Plato's vision to real geography. Some claimed Atlantis lay in the Caribbean, among the islands with their clear waters and golden sands. Others pointed to South America, with its immense rivers and fertile plains. Even the city of Tenochtitlan, with its canals and causeways, was compared to Plato's spiralling rings of water and land. Atlantis was no longer a fable, it was a possibility, and with this possibility came a strange mixture of fear and hope. For if Atlantis had been real, and if it had vanished, then what warning did it hold for those who now built empires of their own? Did it mean that even the greatest civilizations could fall in a single night? That wealth and pride would always invite destruction? Or was Atlantis instead a promise? Proof that human greatness had existed before and could exist again, if only its secrets were rediscovered. Imagine for a moment a scholar in Seville sitting in the glow of candlelight, leafing through Plato's dialogues while maps of the New World lie rolled beside him. He pauses on the description of concentric harbours, of temples plated with gold, of a land rich in every resource. Then he looks up, thinking of reports brought back by sailors, shining cities on lakes, pyramids that touch the sky, rivers that seemed endless. He dips his pen in ink and begins to write, convinced that the mystery has been solved. But of course the sea does not yield so easily. The Americas were real, their civilizations alive and thriving. But Atlantis remained elsewhere, nowhere, everywhere, a ghost on the horizon. As the centuries unfolded, the legend only grew. Explorers sought not only new lands, but confirmation of Plato's tale. Islands that rose from the ocean floor after earthquakes, strange ruins found in jungles, even unusual stones discovered on the seabed. All were whispered to be fragments of Atlantis. In the 17th century, a man named Athanasius Kircher, a Jesuit scholar, drew one of the first maps of Atlantis. In it, he placed the lost island right in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, between Europe and the Americas. His map showed a great landmass, as if bridging the two continents, a land swallowed by the sea, leaving only echoes in the form of scattered islands. The idea was irresistible. It gave explorers a reason to search, dreamers a reason to hope, and storytellers a canvas to fill. And so Atlantis became more than a story of pride and punishment. It became a vision of possibility, a lost golden age waiting to be found. But still, the sea remained silent. The waves whispered, yes, but only in the voices of imagination. No marble streets rose from the depths, no golden temples gleamed beneath the surf. Atlantis, if it had ever been, was beyond reach. Yet this silence did not weaken the legend, it strengthened it. For the less the sea revealed, the more we imagined. And the more we imagined, the more Atlantis became a story not about one time or one place, but about us, our fears, our ambitions, our endless desire to believe there is more, just beyond the horizon, just below the waves. And so, through the age of exploration, Atlantis lived again. Not proven, not dismissed, but suspended between myth and history, like a star reflected in the water, close enough to see, never close enough to touch. The candlelight fades, the sails creak in the wind, the sea rolls on, carrying ships westward into lands once unknown. And still, beneath the surface, the whisper of Atlantis drifts. But the story does not end here, for as centuries passed, the legend would take yet another shape, woven into science, into archaeology, into theories of geology and catastrophe. It would become not only a tale of a lost city, but a question of the earth itself. Could a whole world vanish beneath the sea? The story of Atlantis does not begin with its fall, no. Before the waves rose, before the ground trembled, there was an age unlike any other, a time when the island stood as a jewel upon the ocean. Imagine a land so vast that it stretched far beyond the horizon, a continent rising from the sea. Its shores were kissed by warm winds, and its mountains reached upward, crowned with forests and rivers that flowed like veins of silver across the land. Atlantis, as the philosophers would later whisper, was not a barren place. It was rich, abundant, alive. The soil itself was said to be generous, yielding fruits, grains and herbs without the toil that burdened other lands. The rivers, fed by hidden springs, carried water as clear as glass, while lakes shimmered like polished mirrors beneath the sun. The people of Atlantis looked upon their home not with fear, but with reverence. They believed it were a gift from the gods. And in the heart of this land they built their cities, not of wood or mud, as many others did, but of stone and metal that gleamed beneath the daylight. Streets paved with marble stretched outward in perfect lines, and walls rose high, catching the sun's rays until they glowed like fire. At night the city did not vanish into shadow, for their temples, adorned with copper, tin and precious alloys, reflected the moonlight so brightly that sailors said Atlantis shone even under the darkened sky. The greatest of these temples was said to belong to Poseidon himself. Tall columns carved with figures of gods and sea creatures guarded its entrance, while inside stood a statue of the god, so vast, so towering, that men felt as though they were ants at his feet. His figure was wrought in ivory and gold, his trident of shining bronze, his eyes set with precious stones that seemed to watch all who entered. Around him were the carvings of horses, of dolphins, of waves rolling endlessly. For Atlantis was his domain, a realm of the sea, and its people honoured him above all others. Yet Atlantis was not only a place of worship, it was a place of learning, of craft, of mastery over both earth and water. They built canals that wound through the city like silver threads, wide enough for great ships to pass. These canals circled their lands, dividing them into rings of earth and water, like the ripples of a stone dropped into a pond. Each ring was connected by bridges, each bridge guarded by towers, each tower manned by soldiers whose armour glittered in the sun. But beneath all this grandeur lay something even more striking, the order, the harmony. Atlantis was ruled by 10 kings, each descended, so the tale goes, from Poseidon himself. Each king governed his portion of the island, but together they met in council, bound by laws written not on fragile scrolls, but engraved upon a pillar of shining metal. That pillar stood in Poseidon's temple, unmovable and eternal, so that none could forget the rules of their forefathers. There the kings swore to uphold justice, to protect the weak, to honour the gods, and to preserve the unity of their people, and for a time they did. Under their guidance, Atlantis entered an age of splendour unmatched by any neighbour. Their ships, swift and many, cut across the waves, bringing back treasures from distant lands. Their markets overflowed with spices, fabrics, and rare stones. Their artisans shaped wonders from bronze and gold, Their architects built towers that seemed to defy the earth itself. To those who lived beyond the sea, Atlantis was a mystery. Some thought it a myth even then. Others told tales of its wealth, its armies, its marvels. But the truth was this: Atlantis was not hidden. It was feared. For with its riches came power, and with its power came ambition. The Atlanteans did not only till their fields and praise their gods, they trained their warriors, they built fleets larger than any seen before, and while their kings swore loyalty to one another, in their hearts they began to dream of more. More lands, more subjects, more glory. Still, in those early days their ambition had not yet drowned their wisdom. They remained a people of order, a nation where abundance flowed, where justice was honoured, and where temples gleamed as proof of their devotion. To walk the streets of Atlantis then was, perhaps, to glimpse what mortals might achieve when fortune, skill, and divine blessing intertwined. But fortune is a fragile guest. It does not linger forever. Even as Atlantis basked in its golden age, shadows were gathering at its edges. Pride was whispering in the ears of its rulers. Desire was stirring in the hearts of its people. And far across the sea, other nations watched with wary eyes, knowing that no empire, no matter how radiant, could rise without casting a long shadow upon the world. The tale of Atlantis would not remain a story of harmony. The next chapter would bring conflict, and with conflict, the first cracks in the shining walls. The golden age of Atlantis was not eternal. Even the brightest sun cast shadows, and even the most ordered of kingdoms holds within it the seeds of change. At first, the Atlanteans lived in balance. They honoured their laws, shared their wealth, and held fast to the wisdom of their fathers. But prosperity has a way of softening the human spirit. Where there is too much abundance, desire awakens. Where there is too much power, pride takes root, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the Atlanteans began to turn their gaze outward, beyond their own shores. They had ships enough to cross the oceans, armies enough to command respect, and wealth enough to tempt envy. Why, then, should their dominion stop at the edge of the horizon? It began quietly. First, they established trading colonies along the coasts of Africa and Europe. The ports grew busy with Atlantean merchants, their ships gleaming with polished wood and bronze. Markets once filled only with local goods now overflowed with Atlantean wares: gold, copper, ivory, and exotic fruits. To many it seemed harmless. Commerce, exchange, a bridge between lands. But behind the trade was something more. Each colony carried soldiers as well as merchants, each outpost a watchtower for the growing empire. Soon, Atlantean influence stretched across the Western world. Their merchants spoke new tongues. Their coins passed from hand to hand in distant markets. Their banners flew above foreign harbours. But ambition does not rest with trade alone. Once the Atlanteans had tasted dominion, they hungered for conquest. The kings of Atlantis, once united by solemn oath, now began to boast of their armies, to compare the size of their fleets, to measure their greatness not by justice but by victory. The pillar of laws that stood in Poseidon's temple was still there, gleaming, untarnished. Yet in the hearts of men, its words grew faint, and so the wars began. The Atlanteans struck first across the sea, their galleys slicing through the waves in great formations. They descended upon the coasts of Europe, seeking to bend small kingdoms to their will. Some resisted, but many, overwhelmed by the sudden force of the island empire, submitted. Cities fell, one after another, their rulers forced to swear allegiance to Atlantis. The Atlanteans did not always destroy what they conquered. More often, they absorbed, taking what was useful: craftsmen, soldiers, grain, treasure, and leaving behind governors who answered to their kings. To their allies, it was said, Atlantis brought order. To their enemies, only ruin. Yet the greatest test was still to come, for in their growing ambition, the Atlanteans looked not only to small kingdoms and scattered tribes, but to one of the greatest cities of the ancient world, Athens. Athens, proud and defiant, would not bow. It was a city of philosophers, warriors, and free men. Its citizens were unyielding, its walls strong, its spirit unbroken. When the Atlantean fleets approached, they did not find a people trembling before them, but a people ready for war. The battle that followed, as Plato would later write, was no small affair. Waves churned beneath the weight of ships clashing, oars breaking, hulls splintering. The sea became a grave for many. On land, the clash of bronze echoed across the plains, as spear met shield and sword met armour. At first, Atlantis seemed invincible. Their numbers were vast, their weapons unmatched, their soldiers trained in the arts of war. But Athens fought with a ferocity that startled even the conquerors. Time and again, they repelled the Atlanteans, driving them back with courage and cunning. Where other nations had fallen, Athens stood, and in their resistance lay a turning point. For the Atlanteans, who had never known defeat, tasted it at last. Their armies, once proud and unstoppable, faltered. Their kings, who had believed themselves destined to rule all, now questioned their strength. The people, who had celebrated victory after victory, now mourned the loss of sons and fathers. It was said that the gods themselves watched, that Poseidon, once the protector of Atlantis, grew angered at their arrogance, that Zeus, father of gods and men, looked down with judgment upon their pride. For the Atlanteans had forgotten the balance they once cherished. They had exchanged humility for hubris, justice for greed, devotion for conquest. And so, though they remained powerful, though their cities still gleamed and their ships still filled the seas, the Atlanteans carried within them the mark of decline. Their defeat at Athens was not the end, not yet. But it was the beginning of doubt, the first crack in the golden walls of their empire. They returned home with fewer ships, with weary soldiers, with whispers among their people. Some spoke of glory lost, others of angered gods, and in the temples where once prayers rose in gratitude, now rose pleas for forgiveness. But the tide once turned does not flow backward. The Atlanteans had crossed a threshold. Their greatness was no longer a harmony of power and wisdom. It had become a hunger that could not be sated, a pride that couldn't be tamed, and pride always invites a fall. The defeat at Athens lingered like a shadow over Atlantis. For a time, life continued much as before. The streets were still bright with polished stone. The canals still carried ships heavy with trade. The temples still gleamed in the sun. To the eye, the empire looked unchanged. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. It was in the hearts of the people first. Where there had once been unity, now grew division. Where there had once been pride in justice, now spread whispers of blame. Some said the kings had grown too greedy, too reckless. Others muttered that the gods had turned their faces away. The festivals became more frantic, the sacrifices heavier, as though the people believed that by pouring out more offerings, they could win back the favour they had lost. The kings too changed. Their councils grew heated, their ambitions restless. Some still longed for new conquests, still dreamed of recovering the glory lost at Athens. Others urged caution, fearing that another war would invite only ruin. But in their disagreements, the unity of Atlantis weakened. What had once been a circle of brothers ruling as one now began to splinter into rivals, and all the while the land itself seemed to grow restless. There were tremors beneath the earth, small at first, barely noticed, but soon strong enough to rattle the marble columns and stir the waters in their canals. Storms swept the coasts more fiercely than before, tearing at the harbours, shaking the ships at anchor. Farmers spoke of strange changes in the fields, sudden floods that ruined the crops, or dry seasons that cracked the soil. The priests, who watched the skies and read the signs, grew uneasy. They warned of imbalance, of power shifting in ways unseen, and in the great temple of Poseidon, where once there had been joy in worship, now the hymns rose in fear. It was said that the gods had grown weary of Atlantis. They had given the island every gift: fertile land, abundant wealth, wise laws, and divine favour. But the people had turned those gifts into weapons of arrogance. They had raised their hands against others not for justice, but for domination, and for that the gods would answer. The night it began was calm. The sea lay still, a mirror to the stars. The city glowed in torchlight, its streets filled with the quiet hum of life. Families settled in their homes, soldiers rested in their barracks, priests prepared for the coming dawn. None knew what was about to come. Then the earth shuddered. At first, a low deep sound like thunder beneath the ground. Then the stones themselves began to shift, walls trembling, lamps swaying. In the harbours, ships knocked against one another, their ropes straining, their masts groaning. The people rushed into the streets, crying out, unsure if the world was ending. The tremor grew into a roar. Great fissures cracked through the marble streets, splitting open as if the very earth beneath Atlantis could no longer hold the weight of its pride. Statues toppled, fountains burst, temples shook. The golden pillar in Poseidon's temple quivered, its words of law and justice glowing faintly in the flickering light, but no longer heeded. And then came the sea. Far out beyond the coast, the water drew back, exposing the seabed, leaving fish flapping on the sand. A silence fell, eerie and heavy, as if the ocean itself held its breath. The people, bewildered, stared out at the vanishing water. Some ran forward to gather the fish, not understanding. Others simply froze. And then, the wave. It rose on the horizon, higher and higher, a wall of black water lit only by the moon. It raced forward, faster than any could flee, and when it struck the shore it was as though the sky itself had collapsed. Ships were hurled onto the land, towers smashed, markets swept away in an instant. The canals overflowed, tearing through the city like rivers of destruction. Still the earth shook, buildings crashing, fires breaking out where torches fell. The roar of water and stone swallowed the cries of the people. Mothers clutched children, families huddled together, priests raised their arms to the heavens, but the sea gave no mercy. Wave after wave struck, each higher, each fiercer. The great temples were buried, the marble palaces shattered, the streets filled with rushing water. The king's palaces, once symbols of power, vanished beneath the tide. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, silence. Where Atlantis had stood, there was only sea. The golden city, the proud empire, the shining jewel of the ocean, gone. Not even ruins remained above the surface. All was swallowed, as though the island had never existed. Those who survived, a handful carried away by luck or fate to distant shores, told the story in hushed voices. A mighty city, too proud, too greedy, too arrogant, punished by the gods in a single night. Some believed them, others dismissed them as dreamers or liars, but the story lived on. And so, across generations, Atlantis became not just a place, but a question. Was it history? Was it myth? Or was it both? A warning wrapped in legend, a memory half remembered by humankind. The sea does not give up its secrets easily, and beneath those endless waves, where light fades and silence reigns, perhaps something still waits. Perhaps Atlantis sleeps. The waves had closed over Atlantis. The torches were extinguished, the voices silenced, the marble walls dissolved into the sea. Yet the story did not end with the city's last breath. Stories rarely die with the people who first speak them. They travel quietly, carried from ear to ear, from one generation to the next. And though Atlantis itself vanished beneath the ocean, its memory began to take on a life of its own. It began, as we know, with Plato. In Athens, some 2,400 years ago, he sat down to write his dialogues. Timaeus, Critias, not mere stories, but conversations, shaped with purpose. Within them, he placed the tale of a mighty island, a kingdom blessed by the gods, a people who grew too proud, and a punishment that fell like a shadow over the sea. Plato's words were not written in haste. He was no idle storyteller, spinning myths for amusement. He was a philosopher, and his stories always held meaning. To his students, Atlantis was more than an island. It was an example, a mirror held up to human ambition. It was the lesson of what happens when wealth, knowledge and power are not bound by humility. But once a story is told, it no longer belongs only to its author. Sleep now. Let yourself sink deeper into that perfect relaxation. Your eyelids are heavy. So heavy it would take too much effort to open them now. Your limbs feel pleasantly weighted, impossible to move even if you wanted to, which you don't. You just want to drift all the way down into deep, restful sleep. That's it. Just let go completely. The day is done. The work is finished. Nothing more required of you now except to rest, to renew, to dream perhaps of different possibilities, different worlds. But for now, just sleep deep and peaceful, easy and calm. Sleep now. Sleep well, drifting deeper with each breath down and down into perfect, complete rest.